Welcome to the Midnight Codex, where forgotten truths breathe and shadows tell their tale. Tonight, don't blink and don't look behind you.
I need to write this down. I don't know why, but I have to. Maybe someone will believe me. My name is Tom Harris. I'm 35 years old. I work as a security guard. Nothing special. I'm not religious. I don't care much about churches or any of that stuff. I'm just here to do a job. Life has always been quiet for me. Routine, predictable. I wake up, eat a bowl of cereal, go to work, come home, feed my cat, Jasper. Then, I repeat it all over again. It's not that my life is bad. It's just stuck. My apartment isn't much. It's small, cramped, and it smells like old carpet and dust. But it's mine. It's all I've got. The walls are thin, the neighbors are quiet, and I never have to deal with anyone for too long. The only real company I have is Jasper, a gray tabby. He sits by the window all day, watching the world pass by, and I watch him. Maybe that's why I didn't think twice when I got the call that night. It was after my shift at the mall. I was driving home, nothing unusual. The usual hum of the engine, the flicker of the streetlights passing by. And then my phone rang. Tom Harris? The voice on the other end was crisp, no time for pleasantries. Yeah, who's this? I asked, glancing at the road as I swerved through an intersection. We have a job available tonight, the voice continued. A private event at St. Michael's Cathedral. We need a security guard. Pays well. You interested? I wasn't sure what kind of event needed a security guard at a church, but the pay was good. I didn't ask any questions. Sure, I'm in, I said, already calculating the hours I'd be putting in. The voice on the other end gave me the details. It sounded simple enough. Show up, keep watch, make sure no one leaves or sneaks in. I didn't think much about it. I'd been a guard at the mall for years, and the routine was all the same. When I arrived, I noticed something odd. The church stood at the end of the street, towering over the surrounding buildings. It was beautiful, but in a cold, imposing way. The streetlights flickered, casting long shadows on the stone steps. The church felt different. Something about it made me uneasy, but I pushed it aside. I had a job to do. I walked up the steps, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the silence. The doors were heavy, the wood old and worn. They creaked as I pushed them open, and the smell hit me immediately. Old wood, incense, and something else, something metallic. I didn't like it, but I told myself to focus. I wasn't here to think about the place. I was here to work. Inside, the church was cavernous. The high ceilings seemed to stretch forever, and the faint light from the candles along the altar cast long shadows that twisted unnaturally. It was quiet, too quiet. The air felt thick. It made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The security manager, Karen, met me just inside the door. She was tall, with sharp eyes, and a no-nonsense attitude. You Tom? She asked, scanning me up and down. Yeah, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm here for the job. She nodded. Follow me. I did, walking behind her down the aisle. The church felt off. The silence was overwhelming, and the flickering candlelight made everything look distorted, as if the shadows were alive. She led me to a small office near the back of the church and handed me a set of keys. Listen closely, Karen said. There are a few rules for tonight. I raised an eyebrow. Rules? Yeah, she said. Simple stuff, but it's important. She paused, her eyes narrowing. Don't approach the altar after midnight. If the candles start flickering, don't go near them. I stared at her, unsure if she was joking. Candles? Flickering candles? Karen didn't smile. Trust me, just don't. It's for your safety. She handed me the keys. You'll be alone for most of the night. There's a door at the back of the altar. Do not open it. If it's locked, leave it locked. Don't touch it. I nodded, trying to keep my confusion to myself. All right. You'll be fine, Karen said, but her voice had lost the sharpness. There was something softer in it now, almost like a warning. I left her, walking toward my assigned station by the back of the church. The heavy door closed behind me with a soft thud. The room was dimly lit. The shadows stretched long and twisted, creating strange shapes on the stone floors. I sat down at my desk. There was a window nearby, looking out into the night. The clock on the wall ticked away slowly. The church was silent. Too silent. The hours dragged by. I tried to keep my mind occupied, but the place felt suffocating. The shadows seemed to move on their own, and I kept hearing noises, soft footsteps, whispers I couldn't quite place. I turned around each time, expecting to see someone, but no one was ever there. Then, just after 1 a.m., I heard it again, a noise, this time louder, footsteps, coming from the back of the church. I froze. I could feel my heart in my throat. I turned slowly, but there was nothing. No one, just the shadows stretching across the walls, the flickering candlelight casting strange shapes on the floor. I felt a chill run down my spine. My breath came faster now, my pulse racing. It was nothing, I told myself, just my imagination. But then I heard it again. This time it was clear, a soft whisper, almost too quiet to hear. "Leave." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I turned around, but there was no one. I felt dizzy. The room seemed to spin. The air was thick. The shadows seemed to move, crawling toward me, wrapping around my body. I couldn't breathe. "Leave." I ran toward the altar. The candles flickered. I stopped. I shouldn't get closer. But something inside me told me to look, to know. But then I heard the sound of the door behind me creak open. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I could feel it. The darkness. It was all around me, watching, waiting. The first few hours felt painfully slow. I sat in silence, my eyes flicking between the clock on the wall and the shadows that stretched across the floor. The air was thick with stillness, a kind of suffocating silence that pressed in on me from all sides. The flickering candlelight seemed to dance unnaturally, casting long, distorted shadows that twisted in ways they shouldn't. I couldn't shake the feeling that the church itself was waiting for something, watching me. Around 11:30 p.m., Karen reappeared, her footsteps echoing softly in the silence. She approached, a set of papers in her hand, and handed them to me without a word. I unfolded the sheet. The paper was old, the edges frayed, the ink faded as if it had been written years ago. The words were clear, but the weight of them felt heavier than I expected. "Here," she said, her voice flat. "You need to follow these rules. They're for your safety." I glanced down at the rules and my stomach turned. They seemed simple at first, but the more I read, the more unsettling they became. I felt a chill creep over me, the kind you get when you know you're about to be part of something you don't understand. Rule 1. Never look directly at the altar between 12 a.m. and 3 a.m. I stared at the rule, trying to make sense of it. Never look directly at the altar? My mind raced. Why? What could possibly happen? I looked up at Karen, trying to find some explanation in her eyes. "Why?" I asked before I could stop myself. Her eyes hardened slightly, and for the briefest moment, I saw something flicker in them. It wasn't a look of concern, more like an unspoken warning. "Just trust me," she said, her voice cool. "You'll understand when the time comes." I nodded slowly, though every instinct in me screamed to question it further. But I didn't. I wasn't here to understand. I was here to follow orders. I glanced at the altar again. The candles flickered softly in the dim light, casting long shadows. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but I quickly turned away, the weight of the rule pressing down on me. Rule 2. The candles in the church will flicker only when someone is near. Do not approach them. The candles flicker when someone is near. I blinked, trying to process this new piece of information. It sounded so absurd, I almost laughed. But Karen's face remained expressionless, her eyes dark and unblinking. "Does that mean I shouldn't approach them if they start flickering?" I asked, trying to make sense of it. Karen didn't smile. "Exactly. If you see them flickering, stay away. It's not safe to approach." I nodded, though a growing unease stirred in my chest. I glanced at the candles once more, but this time, something in the back of my mind told me not to look at them, not to think about them. Rule 3. No one is allowed to Leave the church until the event concludes. This rule seemed straightforward enough. A private event. I assumed it was some kind of ritual or ceremony. No one should leave during that kind of thing. But then, something about the way it was phrased made my stomach turn. No one is allowed to leave? I glanced at Karen, but she didn't look at me. She just waited for me to read the rest. I took a deep breath and looked back down at the page. Rule 4. If you hear the sound of chanting, immediately lock all doors and do not open them for any reason. Chanting? My heart skipped a beat. My mind raced. What kind of event was this? A private ceremony. But chanting? What kind of chanting? I asked, my voice coming out tighter than I intended. Karen's face tightened, her eyes darkening. For a moment, it felt like she was trying to decide whether or not to say more. If you hear it, lock everything down, she said, her voice cold, firm. Don't open any doors for anyone. I nodded quickly, though my mind was already spinning. What had I gotten myself into? Rule 5. There's one unmarked door in the back that must remain closed. If it's open, leave immediately. This last rule hit me like a punch to the stomach. Leave immediately if the door's open? I glanced at Karen, trying to catch some kind of explanation in her eyes, but she was already turning away, walking back down the aisle with a purposeful stride. The last rule hung in the air, unresolved. What was behind that door? The thought gnawed at me. It was like an itch in the back of my mind, something I had to know but I couldn't. I stood there for a moment, holding the paper, my hands trembling slightly. The rules weren't just precautions, they were warnings, serious ones. The church around me felt colder now, the shadows deeper, more oppressive. I felt like I was being pulled into something I couldn't understand, something I wasn't supposed to know. I glanced back at the altar. The candles were flickering again, casting eerie shadows across the floor. I couldn't help it. My eyes lingered. Don't look at it, I reminded myself, but it was too late. I had already broken the rule. My heart hammered in my chest as I forced myself to turn away. I had to focus. The clock was ticking. 12:01 a.m. The time had come. The rules were no longer just guidelines. They were my lifeline. I couldn't think too much about them, or the door, or the chanting. I had a job to do. But even as I sat down, my eyes kept darting back to the unmarked door. Why couldn't I open it? What was behind it? The candles flickered again, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Something was coming. I could feel it in my bones. I wasn't ready for it. But it was already here. The night dragged on, and I couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. I'd spent the first few hours walking the church, trying to keep my mind focused. The silence was heavy, oppressive. The walls felt like they were closing in on me. I checked the doors, locked them tight, just as the rules had instructed. Everything was as it should be, yet something about the place gnawed at me. The faint flickering of candles, the eerie stillness. It was as if the church itself were alive, watching me. At first, it was the flickering candles that caught my attention. I'd noticed them earlier, but now they seemed to be flickering more frequently, at random intervals. I'd walk past one, and suddenly it would burn brighter, its light stretching unnaturally. The shadows they cast stretched long, twisting in impossible directions. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just the old air in the church, or perhaps a draft moving through the cracks. But the more I dismissed it, the more unsettled I felt. I kept walking down the aisles, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. The candlelight flickered again, casting a strange glow on the stone walls. The shadows in the corners seemed to shift, moving in ways they shouldn't. They were growing longer, stretching farther, like something was pushing at the edges of the church, trying to break free. The air felt thicker, colder. I tried to ignore it, but it was getting harder. Then, the whispers started. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks, but the voices, they were faint, coming from somewhere behind me. I couldn't pinpoint where they were coming from. They seemed to be just out of reach, as though they were carried by the air itself. Leave. It was soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. My eyes scanned the room, but I saw nothing. No one. Just the quiet flicker of candles in the shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally. I shook my head. I was imagining things. The place was too quiet. My mind was playing tricks. I couldn't be hearing voices. It was impossible. But then it happened again, louder this time. Leave. It was close. Too close. My breath caught in my throat. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Something was wrong. I wasn't alone, but there was no one there. I swallowed hard and forced my legs to move, even though every part of me screamed to turn and run. As if on cue, the candles flickered again, but this time, more violently. The light twisted, as though it were trying to escape the shadows. The air grew colder, thick with something I couldn't name. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was pulling at me, tugging me forward, guiding me toward the altar. I knew the rule: never look directly at the altar between 12 a.m. and 3 a.m. But the pull was irresistible. I could feel it, like a magnetic force, urging me closer. I took one step forward, then another, until I was standing in the center of the aisle, directly in front of it. The air thickened, suffocating me. The temperature seemed to drop, and my breath turned to mist in the cold, damp air. I fought the urge to look. I could feel it in my chest, this strange, uncomfortable pressure building. Something about the altar wasn't right. The shadows beneath it moved like they were alive, twisting and shifting in ways they shouldn't. My feet felt frozen in place, as if the ground itself didn't want me to leave. And then I heard it. A low, guttural hum coming from deep within the altar. It wasn't a sound I could explain. It was like a growl, but muffled, distant, like it was coming from deep beneath the earth. The shadows beneath the altar began to twist, stretching long and dark, almost like fingers creeping out toward me. I staggered back, but I couldn't escape the feeling of being watched. The shadows followed me, their long, dark shapes stretching with every step I took. I turned quickly, my heart hammering in my chest. I couldn't look at the altar anymore. I couldn't. But as I turned, the flickering light of the candles followed me, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to reach out with fingers, trying to grasp me. I retreated quickly, my steps echoing on the stone floor as I moved away from the altar. But the cold presence stayed close. It followed me, like a shadow that would not let go. Around 2 a.m. it began again. The chanting. Low at first, like a distant hum, barely audible over the sound of my own panicked breathing. I froze, listening. The air in the church grew even colder, the temperature dropping so fast it felt like the walls were closing in on me. I remembered the rule. I had to lock the doors. Immediately. I ran to the nearest door, fumbling with the keys in my trembling hands. I could feel the chanting pressing in on me, filling my head, vibrating through my bones. The sound seemed to come from every direction. I could feel it in the walls, in the air. I locked the door, but the sound of the chanting didn't stop. It only grew louder. From the corner of my eye, I saw them. Figures, moving in the shadows. I froze. I didn't dare move. The figures, if you could even call them that, were shifting, bending, contorting in ways that weren't human. Their faces were twisted, grotesque masks of agony. Their eyes were glowing, a sickly yellow-green light, and their bodies moved in unnatural jerks, like puppets controlled by invisible strings. I couldn't look away, but I didn't move. I remembered the rule. Stay in place. Don't leave. I heard their breathing then. It wasn't the sound of air passing through human lungs. It was heavier, deeper, like the sound of something much older, much darker. The figures moved closer, their eyes locked onto mine. The coldness that had been following me all night was now in my chest, making it hard to breathe. I felt a sharp pain in my ribs, but I couldn't look away. I couldn't move. I tried to stay calm, my hands gripping the flashlight in my hand, but my thoughts were racing. What do I do? What do I do? But there was nothing I could do. I could only stay still, hoping that the rules would protect me. Just follow the rules, I told myself. Stay calm. But the figures were getting closer, and the chanting was louder. I thought I might pass out from the pressure in my chest, but I forced myself to stay awake. The shadows moved toward me, their forms blurring in and out of sight, growing more distorted, more grotesque. I couldn't escape. I couldn't run. I was trapped. And as the chanting rose to a deafening pitch, the candles flickered again, brighter this time. The shadows on the walls twisted, stretching out like claws, closing in on me. I didn't know how long I stood there. Time felt like it was stretching, bending in impossible ways. But one thing was clear. I couldn't stay much longer. Not in this place, not with them closing in, but I remembered the rule. Stay in place. And I couldn't bring myself to break it. Not yet. The second night came, and with it, a chilling realization. I walked through the church, the silence now oppressive, crushing. It was different tonight. Every creak of the floorboards beneath my feet sounded like a warning. Every flicker of candlelight seemed to mock my attempts to stay calm. I checked the doors again, just as I had the night before, but this time the building felt alive, breathing, aware of me. The whispering was louder this time. It wasn't just in my head anymore. It was everywhere. A low hum that seemed to seep from the very walls, curling around me like a suffocating fog. Leave. The voice, faint but unmistakable, echoed in the dark corners of the church. I froze, turning slowly, my eyes darting around the room. The shadows were stretching, moving unnaturally, creeping in ways that shouldn't be possible. I couldn't see anyone, but I could feel them, watching, waiting. I told myself it was just my mind, fraying under the pressure of isolation. But even as I tried to shake it off, I noticed something new. Symbols. Strange, cryptic marks drawn hastily but deliberately on the walls. They weren't there before. I was sure of it. My breath caught in my throat as I studied them, my heart pounding in my chest. These weren't random marks. They were deliberate. Each one seemed to pulse with an energy that I couldn't understand, an energy that made the air grow thicker around me. I felt a pull, an irresistible, almost magnetic force drawing me toward something, the unmarked door. I knew the rules. I knew better than to approach it. But something inside me snapped. The need to understand, to see what was hidden, overwhelmed my caution. My hand reached for the door. The moment I touched the handle, a wave of cold rushed through me, a sensation that clawed at my skin, sending a shiver deep into my bones. The door creaked open with a sound that seemed too loud for the silence of the church. As soon as I stepped inside, I felt it. The door slammed shut behind me, trapping me in the dark, suffocating room. I spun around, panic rising in my chest. But it was too late. The room was pitch black. The air tasted metallic, sharp, like blood. My breath came out in shallow gasps. I reached for my flashlight, but it flickered and died in my hand. The room seemed to pulse with dark energy, the walls alive with ancient symbols. They were everywhere, on the ceiling, the floor, even etched into the stones. I could feel them pressing in on me, drawing me deeper into the chamber. The shadows in the room moved, not like normal shadows, but like things with purpose, with intent. They shifted, slithered toward me, as if they were alive. I backed away, but the air grew colder, heavier. Each step seemed to pull me deeper into this place. I tried to turn, but the shadows followed, creeping, crawling toward me like they had been waiting for me. The chanting started then. Low at first, just a hum in the background, but then it grew louder, a dissonant, guttural sound that made my stomach churn. It filled the air, vibrating in my bones like the walls themselves were alive and speaking in tongues. Leave. The voice wasn't just in my ears anymore. It was in my head, my mind, a command, a warning. I tried to move, to turn and run, but my body wouldn't respond. The shadows had wrapped around my feet, pulling me back, holding me in place. Then they appeared. The figures. They weren't human, at least not anymore. They moved in and out of the shadows, their bodies contorted, their faces twisted in agony. Their eyes burned with a sickly yellow-green light, glowing like molten fire. They were tall, towering over me, their limbs moving in unnatural jerks, like puppets being pulled by invisible strings. I wanted to scream, but my throat was dry, constricted. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. They weren't just there, they were in my mind, touching my thoughts, clawing at my sanity. I could feel them pushing, invading my head. They were feeding on my fear. And that's when it hit me. This place, this church, it wasn't just a building, it was a gateway, a portal to something darker. And I wasn't just trapped inside it, I was being drawn in. I was becoming part of it. The truth crashed into me like a wave. This wasn't a place of worship, this was their domain. And the people I thought were innocently praying, silently worshiping, they were cultists, part of the ritual, serving these demonic entities. They were feeding them, offering up their souls as sacrifices. And I was part of it too now. I could feel the walls of the chamber close in on me. The air was thick with their presence, suffocating me. I could hear their whispers, their laughter in my mind, like a chorus of voices. The chanting grew louder, filling every corner of the room, vibrating through the very bones of the church. Join us. I felt my limbs go numb, my mind clouding. They were inside me now, drawing me closer to the altar. They weren't just calling me, they were controlling me, pulling me into their fold, making me one of them. The cultists weren't just followers of these entities. They were the facilitators. They had been performing the rituals for decades, summoning demons, feeding the dark forces. And now I was trapped in the center of it. The demons weren't just inside the church anymore. They were in me, around me, pulling me into their world. I had never been so afraid in my life. The church that I had thought was a place of solace was nothing but a gateway, a breeding ground for darkness. And the more I tried to break free, the more I realized there was no way out. I was part of it now. The shadows moved closer, their forms growing more distinct, more terrifying. I could see their faces, their twisted expressions, the glowing eyes watching me with malice. I was surrounded, trapped. And then, as I looked into their eyes, I understood. There was no escape. The church had claimed me, and I was now a vessel for the demons they had been summoning all these years. I wasn't just a witness to this ritual, I was part of it. The air grew colder still, suffocating. The chanting echoed through the walls, louder and louder, until it consumed me completely. I was lost. I thought the second night was hell, but I was wrong. When the third night began, everything had changed, not with more footsteps, not with more shadows, but with silence. A silence too perfect, too complete, like the world outside the church had simply ceased to exist. I didn't feel tired anymore. I didn't feel anything. My body moved, but my mind drifted. There was a blankness behind my eyes, as if something had drained my emotions and left me hollow. I don't know how long I sat there in the dark, but when I stood, my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the cold realization that something inside me had broken. I wasn't resisting anymore. I wasn't even trying to run. All that was left was a strange, numb acceptance, a quiet voice whispering that maybe I belonged here, that everything I had seen wasn't just a test, but a ritual. And it wasn't over yet. The air was suffocating. Every breath felt like I was inhaling shards of ice. The chanting had grown unbearable, a constant hum that reverberated through my skull, gnawing at my sanity. It felt like the walls were closing in on me, the room pulsing with a dark energy that I couldn't escape. I wasn't alone anymore. I could feel them, the shadows, those figures that lurked just beyond the light, their eyes, sickly yellow, glowing like fire, pierced through the darkness. Watching, I had tried to resist, tried to run, but it was too late. The truth had already settled into my bones. I was part of this, part of something far worse than I had ever imagined. The demons. They weren't just lurking in the corners of the church anymore. They were inside me. The room seemed to shift, its walls warping and distorting as if the very foundation of the church was alive. The symbols on the walls writhed, moving beneath the surface, pulsing with an energy that was growing stronger by the second. They weren't just marks. They were alive. They had been waiting for me to see them, to understand them. And now I did. I didn't want to understand. I wanted to turn away, to close my eyes and pretend none of this was real. But I couldn't. I could feel the power coursing through the air, through my veins, through my soul. I had been chosen, a part of the ritual, a part of the sacrifice. I tried to move, to step back, but my feet wouldn't obey. The shadows surrounded me now, closing in from all sides. The temperature in the room dropped even further, and I could feel the air grow heavy, as if the very essence of the church was pressing down on me. Every breath was harder than the last, every thought clouded by the dark force that was now inside me. And then I saw him. Father Elijah stepped forward, his face no longer the calm, collected facade I had once seen. It was twisted now, filled with an unsettling joy, a satisfaction I couldn't understand. The coldness in his eyes was palpable. He wasn't just a priest, he was one of them. "You think you came here by accident?" Father Elijah's voice was low, almost a whisper, but it felt like a shout inside my mind. "No, Tom. You've been part of this from the very beginning. You've always been a part of it." I shook my head, my mind reeling from the weight of his words. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. I had only taken a job. I hadn't signed up for this. But now there was no denying it. I had been chosen. Father Elijah smiled, his lips curling into something far darker than I had ever imagined. He wasn't the man I had met a few days ago. He was a puppet, too, controlled by forces beyond his comprehension. "Everything is connected, Tom," he continued, stepping closer. "This church, this place, we've all been playing our parts. The ritual is nearly complete. And you," he paused, his voice lowering to a near whisper, "you're the final piece." I wanted to scream, to tell him this was a nightmare, but my throat was tight, my body frozen. I couldn't move. The shadows had already taken me, just like the others before me. There was no escape from this. I looked at the altar. It wasn't just an object anymore. It was a gateway, a passage between worlds. The room trembled, vibrating with an energy that felt like the world itself was about to split open. I could feel the darkness growing stronger. The chanting in the air had grown louder, and I could hear the whispers now too, voices that weren't my own, filling my mind with words I didn't understand, but felt in my very soul. "Look at it," Father Elijah's voice snapped me out of my daze. "Look at the altar, Tom. It's calling to you. It needs you. It needs your soul." I didn't want to look. I didn't want to be a part of this, but my body moved on its own, each step pulling me toward the altar. The energy in the room surged, pushing me forward, forcing me to look at it. The symbols on the altar glowed, swirling with dark power, and I could feel it in my chest, a burning pressure, like my heart was about to explode. "No!" I screamed, but it was barely a whisper, swallowed by the roar of the chanting. I tried to stop myself, but I couldn't. The altar pulled me closer, drawing me into its darkness. And that's when I saw them. The demons. They weren't just shadows anymore. They were real. They were solid. Their monstrous forms filled the room, moving with an unnatural grace that made my skin crawl. Their eyes burned like coals, glowing with a fire that I could feel in my very soul. Their bodies were twisted, grotesque things, human in shape, but not in any way I could comprehend. Their skin was slick, like oil, reflecting the dim light in unnatural ways. One of them stepped forward, its eyes never leaving mine. I felt its gaze like a blade slicing through me, tearing at the fabric of my very being. I tried to look away, but I couldn't. My body wouldn't obey. "You're ours now, Tom," the demon hissed, its voice like the scraping of nails on stone. "We've been waiting for you. All of you." I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. The coldness of their presence wrapped around me, suffocating me. I was paralyzed, trapped in the web they had spun. The altar, the chanting, the shadows, everything was pulling me in. I was already part of it. Father Elijah stepped aside, his smile growing wider, as if he were watching a prize being claimed. "You're no longer just a witness, Tom," he said, his voice dripping with venom. "You are the key. You have always been the key." And then the ritual began. The shadows twisted around me, swirling like smoke. The air turned to liquid, thick with power, pressing against me, making it hard to breathe. I could feel the darkness filling my lungs, my body. It was no longer just the church doing this, it was me. I was part of it now. They were inside me. I wanted to scream again, but the sound never came. The demons, the shadows, the cultists, they were all one, and I was trapped in the center of it all. There was no way out. I had been consumed. The last thing I saw before everything went dark was Father Elijah's face, twisted with triumph. "Welcome, Tom," he whispered, his voice barely a breath in the chaos. "Welcome to the fold." I stood before the altar, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst through my ribs. The darkness around me wasn't just black, it was alive. It pulsed and breathed, wrapping around me like a second skin. I couldn't tell if I was still breathing or if the air had been taken from me completely. Everything felt heavy, wet, like the church itself was pressing inward, trying to swallow me whole. The rules, the damned rules, they used to feel like a lifeline. Don't look at the altar. Don't get too close. Don't open the door. Now they felt like shackles, chains tightening around my wrists and ankles, and I had broken them, every last one. Across from me stood Father Elijah, or whatever he had become. His face was no longer the solemn mask of a priest. It was something else now, something hollow, possessed, a vessel for the thing that ruled this place. His eyes glowed faintly, like dying coals in the ashes of a fire. But they saw everything. "You think you came here by accident?" he asked. His voice wasn't just cold, it was ancient. Something in it stirred a sickness deep in my stomach. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just stood there, every muscle in my body tensed, waiting for something, anything to release me from this nightmare. "You were always meant to be here," he continued, stepping toward me. "You were never meant to escape. Number that couldn't be true. I just needed a job, just needed extra money to make rent. I hadn't signed up for this. I hadn't asked for any of this. But deep down, in the parts of me that had already begun to break, I knew he was right." "The ritual's almost complete," Elijah said, his tone shifting into something reverent. "And you, Tom, you are the final piece, the one who will open the gates." My knees nearly buckled. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him I wouldn't be a part of it, that I wouldn't help bring whatever horror waited behind those gates into our world. But my voice was gone, stolen by fear. I was frozen in place, the shadows pressing tighter around me, whispering secrets I couldn't bear to understand. The altar glowed now, not with candlelight, but with something sickly and unnatural. The symbols carved into the stone shifted before my eyes, forming new patterns, spiraling into grotesque shapes that made my vision blur. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. It pulled at me, tugging at my eyes, my thoughts, my soul. The chanting returned, louder than ever, like an avalanche of voices, all speaking in a language not meant for human ears. The sound twisted my insides, filled my head with pressure. My ears rang, my knees shook, and still the altar called to me. "Look at it," Elijah whispered, his voice now right behind me. "You can feel it, can't you? It's been calling you since the moment you arrived." He was right. I could feel it, a thrum in my chest, a resonance in my bones. The pull wasn't just around me, it was inside me. And then I heard it. A voice, faint, gentle, fragile. But it was mine. My own voice echoed inside my head, not in defiance, not in courage, but in surrender. "You think you have a choice?" it said. My breath caught. That wasn't me. Not really. It sounded like me, but it was twisted, darker, mocking, a version of me that had already given up. "You were never meant to escape," the voice continued. "The church has already claimed you. You're nothing but a vessel now." Number. That wasn't true. I clenched my fists, trying to drown it out. I wasn't a vessel. I wasn't a pawn. I was still here, still thinking, still fighting. But the voice laughed, and I felt it, like fingers scraping across the inside of my skull. My knees gave out. I dropped to the floor, gasping for air. The shadows coiled tighter. The altar glowed brighter, and I knew I was losing. "Elijah," I croaked barely above a whisper, "please." But he only smiled wide and cruel. "You're no longer just a witness, Tom," he said. "You are the key, the one who will open it." The chanting surged, rising like a wave. The walls trembled. Dust rained from the ceiling. The symbols on the floor shimmered with blood-colored light. And then I saw them. The demons. They stepped from the shadows like they had always belonged there. They weren't illusions anymore. They were real, monstrous, twisted, crawling and shifting and grinning with mouths that were far too wide. Their eyes glowed with hunger. Their skin writhed as though something beneath it was trying to break free. One of them moved toward me. Its gaze met mine. And in that moment, I felt my mind start to unravel. "You're ours now, Tom," it hissed. "We've been waiting for you." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. The cold around me turned to ice inside my veins. My thoughts fractured. My will dissolved. They had me. They had all of me. Elijah stepped aside, his arms raised as though offering me like a gift to the creatures behind him. "You're the key," he said again, "and the gate will open." The chanting reached a deafening peak. The altar pulsed, the shadows surged forward, and just as the world began to collapse around me, I heard her voice. Pixel, software small, but unmistakably hers. "Tom," she said, "don't give up." I froze. It wasn't loud, it wasn't commanding, but it cut through the darkness like a blade of light. Her voice, her memory, was still in me, still holding on. "You can still choose." Those words. They cracked something open in me, a fissure in the darkness, a breath of air after drowning. The pull of the altar faltered, the shadows hesitated. I was still here, still me. With every ounce of strength I had left, I stood. The chanting faltered for a split second, and then a loud crash echoed through the church. A door slammed shut behind me. The light vanished. The darkness surged again. I stood frozen, caught between the altar and whatever lay behind it. My soul balanced on the edge of a blade. I could feel the final moment approaching, either surrender or resistance, but I didn't know if I still had the strength to choose. The voice, my voice, returned, colder now. Final. "You can't escape this, Tom." And then the darkness surged forward, ravenous, endless, and it took me.